Lucas, after 22 years together, I've decided that I want to live my truth. I'm leaving you. Sarah's words echoed through the elegant Magnolia Springs restaurant, where we were celebrating our son Daniel's graduation in mechanical engineering. 43 guests, our closest friends, family, and co-workers, stopped talking instantly. Forks were suspended in midair. The sound of glasses being placed on tables created an awkward silence that cut through the festive atmosphere like a knife. Sarah stood next to my chair, her navy blue dress impeccable, her blonde hair perfectly styled for the occasion. She held a champagne glass, as if toasting. But her words had turned the celebration into a public courtroom. Everyone waited for my reaction. The tears. The shock. The complete humiliation in front of people who had known us for decades. Instead, I smiled. Congratulations on your honesty, Sarah. My voice came out calm, controlled. My name is Lucas Mitchell. I am 48 years old, and until this moment, I believed I was married to a woman of integrity. Sarah blinked several times, clearly taken aback by my reaction. She expected me to beg to make a scene, to confirm for everyone there the narrative she had carefully constructed. Lucas, the neglectful husband who lost his wife because he didn't pay enough attention to her. For 2 decades, I had been the devoted provider. I worked as a financial consultant, building a solid company while Sarah found herself through various art classes, alternative therapies, and self-help groups. I paid for everything without question, believing I was supporting the dreams of the woman I loved. Daniel, our 24-year-old son, sat to my right, still wearing his graduation cap. His expression had frozen in absolute horror. Over the past few months, I had shielded him from the truth of what I had discovered, not wanting to affect his senior year. Across the restaurant, I could see Marcus Henley, the 34-year-old personal trainer Sarah had been working out with for the past 8 months. He was sitting at a low-key table, clearly uncomfortable, avoiding eye contact. The same Marcus who had been coming to our house for yoga sessions when I was at work. The same friends who surrounded us, some even smiled warmly at Marcus when he arrived, had apparently known about the affair for months. No one had the decency to tell me. Calmly, I removed a sealed envelope from the inside pocket of my blazer. I placed it gently next to Sarah's plate. "What's that?" she asked, her confidence beginning to falter. "Something for you to read later," I replied, keeping my tone even. I turned to Daniel, whose face was as pale as a sheet. I held his hand tightly. "Son, I'm very proud of you. This day is still about your achievement." I stood up, adjusted my tie, and addressed the stunned guests. "Please enjoy your meal. I wish you all a wonderful afternoon." With that, I walked toward the restaurant exit, keeping my posture straight, feeling 43 pairs of eyes following me. The heavy door closed behind me, muffling the anxious murmurs that were beginning to spread across the tables. Outside, the June heat in Atlanta hit me like a wall, but for the first time in months, I could breathe freely. Behind me, I heard the restaurant door swing open violently, followed by Sarah's voice, now high-pitched and desperate. "Lucas, what the hell is this? What have you done?" I kept walking, allowing myself a small smile. The envelope I had given her contained only the beginning of my answer, an answer I had been meticulously planning for 4 months. I had always been the strategist in our relationship. While Sarah dreamed and spent, I maintained the stability our family needed. I was the one who invested in Daniel's education when Sarah wanted to spend our savings on a 3-month spiritual retreat in Costa Rica. I was the one who worked extra weekends to maintain our standard of living when she decided she needed to explore her creativity by opening a craft store that lasted exactly 5 months. My own dreams, perhaps expanding my consulting business, traveling through Europe, writing the book on financial planning I've always wanted to write, were perpetually on the back burner. After Daniel graduates, I told myself. After Sarah settles down. 3 months ago, I noticed inconsistencies in our bank statements. Small but regular transfers to an account I didn't recognize. Having spent 20 years managing our family finances, these irregularities stood out as red flags. I could have confronted Sarah immediately. But something stopped me. Maybe it was intuition, or maybe it was the growing distance between us over the past year. Instead, I began a silent investigation. What I discovered was worse than I could have imagined. If you're following this story of betrayal and discovering how public humiliation can turn into the biggest twist in someone's life, be sure to subscribe to the channel to find out how this meticulously planned revenge will unfold. Because what Sarah didn't know was that I was already 3 steps ahead of her. Sarah wasn't a bad woman by nature. She was something worse, a woman who had learned to use her fragility as a weapon of manipulation. For 22 years, I watched her turn every abandoned dream into an excuse to spend our money. The craft store that needed startup capital closed in 5 months, leaving a $15,000 hole in our budget. The life coaching course that would change her calling lasted 3 weeks before she decided it wasn't her energy. But Marcus Henley represented something different. He wasn't just another passing fancy for Sarah. Marcus was 34, sculpted, and had that arrogant confidence of someone who had never worked a day in his life. His yoga sessions at our house always happened when I was closing important deals, working weekends, or traveling to expand my consulting business. Sarah hired him 8 months ago, claiming she needed to reconnect with her body after 40. What she was really doing was reconnecting with a man 14 years her junior, who saw her as his chance at a financially stable life. I discovered the full extent of the betrayal 4 months ago, but the signs were there long before that. Sarah started exercising religiously, something she had avoided during our entire decade of marriage. She bought new clothes, changed her haircut, and started wearing elaborate makeup for her home workout sessions. When I questioned the excessive spending on designer workout clothes, she accused me of trying to control her journey of self-discovery. When I asked why she needed a personal trainer when we had a fully equipped gym at home, she said I was sabotaging her personal growth. The real investigation began when I noticed monthly transfers of $1,500 to an account I had never heard of. As a financial advisor specializing in audits, these patterns were obvious to me. I hired a private investigator, discreetly, using a personal account Sarah didn't know about. What I discovered was devastating. Sarah wasn't just having an affair. She was completely financing Marcus's life. The apartment he shared with a friend was paid for entirely by her. The new car he had bought? Financed through transfers from our joint account. The monthly work trips Sarah took to wellness conferences? Romantic getaways to destinations I was unwittingly paying for. Even worse, Marcus wasn't the first. Over the past 5 years, Sarah had had at least 3 extramarital affairs. Each one financed with the money I earned working 12-hour days to maintain our lifestyle. The 2019 Pilates instructor. The 2020 crystal therapist. The nutrition coach from 2021. All younger men, all supported by regular transfers that Sarah classified as wellness investments when I reviewed our statements. She had turned our joint account into her personal fund for extramarital affairs. But today's public humiliation wasn't impulsive. It was calculated. From the text messages I was able to access, I learned that Sarah and Marcus had been planning this moment for weeks. They wanted me to be publicly devastated, to react emotionally in front of our friends and family. The narrative they intended to construct was simple: Lucas, the workaholic husband who neglected his wife, finally facing the consequences of his misguided priorities. Sarah wanted me to beg. She wanted tears, despair, a dramatic scene that would validate her decision in front of everyone who knew us. What she didn't know was that I had discovered something far more devastating than her secret bank transfers. During my investigation, I found conversations between Sarah and Marcus about their post-divorce plans. They weren't just planning a future together, they were planning a future financed entirely by my alimony. Marcus had meticulously researched Georgia divorce laws. They knew exactly how much Sarah could get, and they had already made detailed plans on how to spend every penny. The house they planned to buy. The trips they would take. The business Marcus wanted to start, a chain of gyms financed by my divorce settlement. Sarah had turned our separation into an investment project. Worst of all, our friends knew. Jennifer, Sarah's best friend of 15 years, didn't just know Marcus, she introduced them. Tom and Rebecca, with whom we spent every holiday, had hosted dinners where Marcus was invited while I worked. The humiliation didn't start today at the restaurant. It had been going on for months, with half of Atlanta whispering about poor Lucas, who didn't know his wife was cheating on him publicly. As I drove home after leaving the restaurant, my phone rang incessantly. Daniel calling desperately. Sarah sending angry messages demanding an explanation for the envelope. Even Jennifer had the audacity to text me, "Lucas, maybe you two should talk like adults." I ignored it all. Because what none of them knew was that the envelope I had given Sarah contained only a small sample of what I had discovered. It was like showing the tip of an iceberg, knowing that 90% remained hidden beneath the surface. Sarah had fundamentally underestimated one thing about me: I wasn't just a competent financial advisor. I was an expert at tracking down hidden assets, uncovering financial fraud, and documenting evidence of bad faith in complex transactions. Skills I had developed auditing dishonest companies for 2 decades would now be applied to my own personal life. The game was just beginning, and Sarah had no idea what the rules were. 3 hours after leaving the restaurant, my phone had logged 47 missed calls and 83 text messages. Sarah, Daniel, our friends, even my mother had called after someone told her about the graduation drama. I ignored them all. Instead, I stopped at the Starbucks near our house and opened my laptop. During 2 decades of building my financial consulting business, I had learned that people reveal more about themselves in moments of panic than in years of normal interaction. Sarah was in full panic mode. The messages started out polite: "Lucas, we need to talk like adults." They quickly escalated to desperate: "Please call me. We can work this out." And finally they became threatening: "You can't humiliate me like this in public and get away with it." But it was message number 81 that confirmed my darkest suspicions. "You forgot that I know about your depression issues from 2018. Watch what you do, or everyone will know how unstable you really are." Sarah was willing to use my mental health crisis, the result of stress from working 3 jobs, to finance her self-discovery phase, as emotional blackmail. This wasn't about divorce anymore. It was psychological warfare. My phone vibrated with a call from Daniel. This time, I answered. "Dad." His voice was hoarse, clearly shaken. "What the hell is going on? Mom is saying things that don't make sense. She said you've gone crazy, that you blackmailed her somehow." "Daniel," I replied calmly, "do you trust me?" "Of course, but..." "Then trust that everything will be clear very soon. Your mother and I need to work through some adult issues. This has nothing to do with you." "But Dad, she's saying you might do something dangerous. She wants me to come home to make sure you're okay." I smiled wryly. Sarah was trying to use our own son as a pawn in her game of manipulation. "I'm perfectly fine, Daniel. In fact, I've never been better. But I need you to understand something. Over the next few days, your mother may tell you stories about me. Some of them may even have grains of truth in them. Don't believe everything you hear." "Dad, you're scaring me." "You don't need to be scared. Just remember that there are 2 sides to every story. And soon you'll hear my side." When I hung up, a new wave of messages had arrived. This time, they weren't just from Sarah. Jennifer, Tom, Rebecca, practically our entire social circle had become a sounding board for Sarah's version of the story. According to her messages, I had threatened Sarah publicly, was having a breakdown, and needed immediate professional help. Most disturbing was how easily our friends bought into this narrative. People who had known me for 2 decades, who knew my history of stability and responsibility, were accepting without question that I had become a dangerous threat. That's when I realized something devastating. Sarah hadn't just planned to leave me. She had planned to completely destroy my reputation in the process. The concerned messages from our friends had a suspicious pattern. They all mentioned my emotional instability in 2018, they all suggested that I could be dangerous when cornered, they all offered Sarah support during this difficult time. Sarah had spent months laying the groundwork, planting seeds of doubt about my mental health so that when the time came for her grand exit, she would look like the victim of an unstable husband. My phone rang again. "Marcus." I answered on the second ring. "Listen here, man," his young voice tried to sound intimidating, "you need to stop stalking Sarah. She's terrified of your threats." "Threats?" I kept my voice neutral. "What specific threats have I made, Marcus?" "You know exactly what you did. That envelope, that whole scene at the restaurant." "You were there, Marcus? At the restaurant?" Silence. He'd given himself away. "Interesting," I continued. "Sarah said you weren't in a relationship yet. But you were there, watching her publicly announce that she was leaving me. Almost as if you planned it together." Look man, this has nothing to do with me." "It has everything to do with you, Marcus. Especially considering that you've been benefiting financially from our marriage for 8 months." Another silence. Longer this time. I don't know what you're talking about. $1,500 a month. Transferred from our joint account to your personal account. Rent-controlled apartment in Midtown that's in your name but paid for through automatic transfers Sarah set up. The BMW you bought in March using a pre-approved loan based on her income. I could hear her breathing quicken on the other end of the line. You're a smart one, Marcus. You found a 48-year-old woman going through a midlife crisis, convinced her to finance your entire life while you planned to steal half my assets through divorce. Pretty impressive for someone who's never held a job for more than 6 months. You can't prove any of this. I can prove all of that. And I'll prove a lot more than that. I hung up before he could respond. It was in that moment, sitting in Starbucks while my social life imploded via text message, that I made an irreversible decision. Sarah wanted a war? She was going to get a war. But she had fundamentally underestimated who she was up against. For 2 decades, I had built a reputation based on a very specific specialty, finding out where people hid their darkest financial secrets. Sarah and Marcus had made the mistake of turning my own life into a forensic audit case. And I was about to treat them exactly as I treated every other fraudster who crossed my professional path. I opened a new spreadsheet on my laptop and began systematically cataloging every piece of evidence I had collected over the past 4 months. Bank transfers. Text messages. Private investigator reports. Photographs. Audio recordings. But that was just the beginning. The envelope I handed Sarah contained only a small sample, the divorce papers and superficial evidence of unauthorized transfers. It was like showing the tip of an iceberg while keeping 90% hidden below the surface. What Sarah didn't know yet was that I had discovered much more than her transfers to Marcus. I had found out about Tom Reynolds. Our accountant for 12 years. The man I trusted with every detail of our personal and business finances. The same Tom who had advised Sarah on how to structure her transfers so they would look like legitimate wellness expenses. The same Tom who had set up a shell corporate account through which Sarah funneled money to Marcus without leaving any obvious traces on our main statements. The same Tom who, during our last quarterly meeting, had looked me straight in the eye and confirmed that our finances were perfectly organized, while knowing exactly how my wife was systematically robbing me. Sarah's betrayal hurt. The complicity of our friends was humiliating. But Tom's active participation in the fraud? That was criminal. Through the bank records I was able to legally access as a joint account holder, I discovered that Tom had created an elaborate structure of cross-transfers. Sarah wasn't just moving $1,500 a month to Marcus. She was moving $5,000 a month through multiple accounts, all masked as corporate expenses for my own consulting firm. Personal development seminars. Marketing consulting. Office equipment. Each transfer looked legitimate on its own, but when viewed together, they revealed a systematic pattern of embezzlement. Tom was charging a percentage for each specialized consulting transfer that cost $300 a month out of our own resources. My wife and my accountant were literally charging me for the privilege of stealing from me. I closed my laptop and called my personal lawyer, James Morrison, who worked at a different firm and had no connection to Tom or Sarah. James, I need to schedule an urgent meeting. And I'm going to need you to recommend a financial crime specialist. Lucas? Are you okay? I've heard some rumors about. Rumors are irrelevant. I need professional help documenting marital fraud and third-party participation in embezzlement. Silence on the other end of the line. James had been my lawyer for 15 years. He knew I didn't make accusations lightly. What kind of amounts are we talking about? Approximately $200,000 over the last 3 years. Jesus Christ, Lucas. Are you sure? I have complete documentation. And James? It's going to get worse before it gets better. I scheduled the meeting for the next day and returned home for the first time since the humiliation at the restaurant. Sarah was in the living room, clearly waiting for me. She had changed out of her elegant dress and was wearing a silk robe, her hair loose, her makeup smudged. The perfect image of a wife devastated by separation. Lucas, she began, her voice taking on that vulnerable tone she used when she wanted something, we need to talk like adults. I sat down in the armchair opposite the sofa where she was sitting, keeping a deliberate physical distance. I'm listening. I know you're hurt. I know the way I Announced our separation was inappropriate. But you need to understand that I've felt neglected for years. Here was the narrative she had rehearsed. The misunderstood wife of a workaholic husband. Marcus is just. He makes me feel alive again. He reminds me of who I was before I became just your wife and Daniel's mother. And the bank transfers? She blinked several times, momentarily disconcerted. What transfers? $5,000 a month. Channeled through Shell corporate accounts. To fund your relationship with Marcus. Sarah's face drained of color. I don't know what you're talking about. Tom Reynolds knows. He structured the entire scheme. Sarah stood abruptly, walking to the window. You're exaggerating. It was just a little help. Marcus was going through some financial difficulties. $200,000 isn't a little help, Sarah. She turned, and for a moment, I saw a glimpse of the real Sarah. Not the vulnerable wife or the woman in existential crisis. The cold calculator who had orchestrated an elaborate fraud for years. Half that money is mine by right, she said, her voice losing all pretense of fragility. We've been married for 22 years. I helped build your company. You contributed by staying home while I worked 70 hours a week. I contributed by maintaining our home, raising our son, being your social partner when you needed to impress clients. It was fascinating to watch Sarah reconstruct the narrative in real time. Now she was no longer the neglected wife seeking love. She was the unrecognized business partner demanding fair compensation. And Tom? What was his contribution to deserve his share? Sarah hesitated. Tom just helped me navigate complex financial issues. Tom created false documentation to mask misappropriation. That's a federal crime, Sarah. You're being dramatic. I'm being accurate. My phone rang. Marcus. I deliberately answered on speakerphone. Lucas, man, look, maybe we can work this out without drama. Sarah told me about your threats. What specific threats, Marcus? The envelope. The investigations. You can't destroy our life out of jealousy. Sarah had told Marcus about our private conversation in less than an hour. They weren't just lovers, they were active conspirators. Marcus, do you have a lawyer? Why would I need a lawyer? Because you knowingly participated in a money laundering scheme. Your bank account received funds illegally diverted from corporate accounts through fraudulent documentation. Prolonged silence. That's not true. Sarah said the money came from your personal account. I looked directly at Sarah, who had turned pale again. Interesting. Sarah, did you tell Marcus that the money came from where? We're not discussing this on the phone. Marcus, I continued, Sarah lied to you. The money came from corporate accounts through fraudulent transfers. You're technically an accomplice to financial crime. Sarah, what the fuck is this? Marcus, get off the phone, Sarah said quickly. No, man, I want to understand this. Sarah, you told me that. Sarah hung up. The silence that followed was revealing. Sarah had lied to everyone, to me, to Marcus, probably to Tom about the actual amounts involved. Her web of lies was beginning to collide with itself. Marcus didn't know about the real source of the money, I observed. That doesn't change anything. It changes everything. It means you've deceived all of us. It means that not even your accomplices knew the full extent of your fraud. Sarah sat down heavily on the sofa. What do you want, Lucas? I want you to understand your situation completely. Tomorrow morning, I'm meeting with lawyers who specialize in financial crimes. I have documentation of 3 years of misappropriation, third-party involvement, and creation of fraudulent documents. You can't prove it was intentional. I smiled for the first time since the restaurant. I can prove it was systematic, elaborate, and involved multiple people. Intent is presumed in crimes of this complexity. Sarah stared at me with a mixture of anger and something I recognized as genuine fear. Furthermore, I continued, Tom left digital footprints of all communications. Emails detailing how to structure the transfers. Text messages about our special situation. He documented his own participation. The truth was that Tom had been overly cautious, creating records of every decision to protect himself legally. Those same records were now perfect evidence of criminal conspiracy. Sarah was finally realizing that her public humiliation at the restaurant had been the least of her problems. If you're following this story of betrayal turning into a complex criminal case, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Because the revenge Sarah thought she had avoided was just beginning. And when the sun rose the next day, she would discover that underestimating an experienced financial advisor had been the most expensive mistake of her life. The next morning, at 9 a.m. sharp, I was sitting in James Morrison's office with 3 experts, a criminal lawyer, a forensic accountant, and a retired federal investigator who now worked as a private consultant. Spread out on the conference table were 247 pages of meticulously organized evidence. Bank transfers, emails, text messages, photographs, audio recordings. A 3-year timeline of systematic fraud. Jesus Christ, Lucas, muttered David Chun, the forensic accountant, leafing through the bank statements. This isn't just marital infidelity. It's a sophisticated criminal operation. The criminal lawyer, Margaret Sullivan, was reviewing the communications between Sarah and Tom. Conspiracies of this complexity usually result in federal charges, especially with the involvement of corporate accounts and fraudulent documentation. My phone buzzed. Sarah, again. Lucas, please call me. We can work this out civilly. Tom said you're overplaying the legal situation. I showed the message to Margaret, who smiled coldly. She still doesn't understand that there's no negotiation possible when federal crimes are involved. Robert Hayes, the federal investigator, looked up from a stack of documents. The accountant, Tom Reynolds, left extraordinarily detailed digital fingerprints. It's as if he was documenting his own criminal activity for legal protection. He probably was, I replied. Tom was always overly cautious. He wanted to have evidence that he followed Sarah's specific instructions in case he was discovered. Ironic, James commented. His paranoia about legal protection has become our strongest evidence of conscious conspiracy. Margaret closed her briefcase. Lucas, I need to be clear about the implications. Once we present this to the prosecutor, there's no turning back. Sarah and Tom will face criminal charges that could result in years in prison. What about Marcus? Marcus is more complicated. If we can prove that he knew about the fraudulent origin of the funds, he's also an accomplice. But his messages suggest that Sarah may have lied to him about the source of the money. It was fascinating how Sarah's web of lies was turning against her. She had even deceived her accomplices. My phone rang. Daniel. Dad, you need to come home. Now. Mom is having a panic attack and saying things that don't make sense about prison and stolen money. I'm on my way. 40 minutes later, I arrived home to find a chaotic scene. Sarah was on the couch, visibly agitated, while Daniel tried to calm her down. Marcus was present, pacing nervously around the room, clearly panicked. Lucas. Sarah stood up abruptly when she saw me. You need to stop this madness. Tom said you're threatening to sue us all criminally. Tom called you. He called me in a panic. He said you have lawyers who specialize in federal crimes. He said you could go to prison. I looked at Marcus, who was avoiding eye contact. Marcus, did you know that the money Sarah was giving you came from corporate accounts through fraudulent documentation? She said it was from your personal savings. So you didn't know you were receiving illegally diverted funds? No. Sarah, you told me that. Marcus, shut up, Sarah interrupted sharply. Daniel watched us with growing horror. Dad, what are you talking about? What money? What crime? It was time for my son to know the whole truth. Daniel, for the past 3 years, your mother has systematically embezzled $200,000 from my company through fake accounts set up by our accountant. She used that money to fund extramarital relationships with multiple men, including Marcus. Daniel's face drained of color. $200,000? Your mother didn't just cheat on me emotionally. She committed corporate fraud on a grand scale. Sarah exploded. You're twisting everything. It was our money. I had a right to. You had no right to create false documentation to mask unauthorized transfers from corporate accounts, I interrupted calmly. That's a federal crime. Marcus finally found his voice. Sarah, you told me it was your personal money. You lied to me too. I protected you, Sarah shouted. You didn't need to know the financial details. The financial details are the difference between having an extramarital affair and being an accomplice to money laundering, I replied. Sarah's phone rang. Tom. She answered on speakerphone, her hands shaking. Tom, please tell me you can fix this. Tom's voice was broken, desperate. Sarah, I can't fix anything. My own lawyers say I'm facing possible federal charges. They recommend that I cooperate fully with the authorities. Cooperate? Cooperate how? By providing all records of our communications. All the instructions you gave me. All the methods we used to mask the transfers. Sarah went pale. Tom, you can't. Sarah, I'm going to save my own skin. I have a family to protect. The call ended. The silence that followed was devastating. Sarah finally understood that her conspiracy network was completely unraveling. Tom would betray her to reduce his own sentence. Marcus had discovered that he had been deceived. Daniel knew the truth about her dishonesty. Lucas, she said, her voice taking on a pleading tone I hadn't heard in years, please. We can find a way to work this out privately. There is no private resolution for federal crimes, Sarah. Daniel stood up abruptly. Mom, did you really steal $200,000 from Dad? Sarah tried to approach him, but Daniel backed away. It wasn't stealing. It was our family money. I just reorganized access to it. Through fraudulent documentation and false accounts, I added. That's the legal definition of embezzlement and money laundering. Marcus was looking at Sarah as if he were seeing her for the first time. You turned me into a criminal without my knowledge. No one is a criminal, Sarah shouted, completely losing her composure. Lucas is exaggerating everything to punish me for leaving him. That's when my phone rang. Margaret Sullivan. Lucas, we just received confirmation. The district attorney's office is interested in the case. Tom Reynolds has already proactively contacted them, offering full cooperation in exchange for leniency in sentencing. I deliberately put the call on speakerphone. Ms. Sullivan, I'm at home with Sarah, Marcus, and my son. Everyone can hear. I understand. I can inform you that, based on the documentation provided by Mr. Reynolds and the evidence you have gathered, the district attorney's office is preparing formal charges of conspiracy to commit fraud, embezzlement, and money laundering. Sarah collapsed onto the couch, finally understanding that there was no escape. The charges will be filed on Monday. I recommend that Ms. Caldwell seek criminal representation immediately. The call ended, leaving the room in absolute silence. Marcus was the first to speak. Sarah, I have to go. I need a lawyer. Daniel was staring at his mother with a mixture of disappointment and horror that broke my heart. And Sarah? Sarah was finally facing the reality that her public humiliation at the restaurant had been only the first move in a much more complex game. A game where she had completely underestimated her opponent. What she didn't know yet was that Monday would be only the beginning of her real consequences. 6 months later, I was sitting in federal court, watching Sarah get sentenced to 4 years in prison for conspiracy to commit fraud and money laundering. Her hands were shaking as the judge read the verdict, the same tremor I had noticed that last night at home. Marcus received 18 months for complicity, even though he had cooperated extensively after discovering that Sarah had misled him about the source of the funds. Tom, for his initial cooperation, got a suspended sentence and 5 years of probation, but lost his accounting license and his professional reputation. Daniel stood beside me in the courtroom, having chosen to support his mother completely through the legal process even though he disagreed with her actions. He had become an extraordinarily mature young man during those months, handling the family situation with a dignity that filled me with pride. Dad, he whispered as Sarah was escorted from the courtroom, do you think she'll be okay? Your mother is stronger than she appears, I replied honestly. This experience may be exactly what she needs to truly find herself. The transformation in my own life had been equally dramatic, though in the completely opposite direction. With the money recovered through the legal proceedings and the liquidation of the assets, I had finally realized the dream I had kept on the back burner for decades, expanding my consulting practice into a national operation specializing in helping victims of marital fraud. Mitchell & Associates, protecting families through financial transparency, now operated in 12 states with a staff of 23 experts. Our focus was on teaching couples how to create financial structures that protected both the partnership and the individuals, preventing exactly the kind of manipulation Sarah had perpetrated. The case had become a textbook example in law schools of how complex marital fraud was uncovered and prosecuted. 3 universities invited me to speak about the intersection of personal relationships and financial crime. Jennifer, Tom, and Rebecca, our former friends who had been silent accomplices to betrayal, faced their own social consequences. When the story became public through court reports, the Atlanta community reacted with outrage at their complicity. Jennifer lost several important clients from her interior design business. Tom and Rebecca moved out of state, unable to cope with the social ostracism. The network of relationships that had sustained Sarah during her betrayal collapsed completely when confronted with the reality of her criminal actions. But the most profound transformation happened within myself. During the months of investigation, legal preparation, and court proceedings, I discovered an inner strength I didn't know I possessed. It wasn't just the satisfaction of revenge. It was the realization that I had allowed myself to be victimized for so long, not only by Sarah, but by my own tendency to put the needs of others before my own. The public humiliation at the restaurant, which Sarah had planned as my moment of greatest weakness, became the catalyst for my greatest personal transformation. 6 months after the trial, I received a letter from Sarah in prison. "Lucas," she wrote, "I know I have no right to ask for forgiveness, but I need you to know that I understand now the extent of what I did. Therapy here has helped me see how I turned our partnership into a system of exploitation. You deserved so much better. Daniel tells me about your new company and how you're helping other families. I am genuinely proud of the man you have become." The letter was sincere in a way Sarah had never been during our marriage. Prison had forced a self-examination that decades of self-discovery had failed to achieve. I replied briefly, wishing her genuine growth and healing. A year after sentencing, Daniel graduated from business school and joined my company. We worked together developing educational programs for young couples on financial transparency and healthy communication in relationships. "Dad," he told me over lunch, "you turned the worst experience of your life into the foundation for helping thousands of other people. That's what I call perfect revenge." He was right. True revenge had not been seeing Sarah face legal consequences. It had been discovering that I was capable of so much more than I ever imagined when I finally stopped diminishing myself to accommodate the dysfunction of others. The most powerful lesson I learned was that betrayal, while devastating, can be the most necessary wake-up call of our lives. Sarah tried to destroy me, but she only revealed inner resources I didn't know I had. Today, when I look back, I see that her public humiliation in the restaurant was the greatest favor she could have done me. It forced me to stop being a victim and start being the protagonist of my own story. If this story of betrayal turned triumph has touched you, subscribe to the channel right now. We have dozens of similar stories about people who turned their worst experiences into the foundations of their greatest victories. Click the bell to be notified whenever we publish a new story of redemption and revenge. The last time I heard from Sarah, she had been released from prison after serving 3 years of her sentence for good behavior. She was working in a social reintegration program, helping other women rebuild their lives after personal crises. As for me? Well, last week I opened our 15th office, this time in Seattle, where Daniel will manage our new preventive technology division. The difference is that now, when I wake up every morning, I'm no longer Sarah's neglected husband. I'm Lucas Mitchell, and this is the life I've built after finally learning to value myself.